Warning, this podcast contains heavy spoilers for not just one movie, but entire franchises. We highly recommend going and watching these movies before listening to us as a companion piece that stitches all the timelines into one creepy, crime-ridden story. There will be no more spoiler warnings. We do not break character. After this, there is no turning back. You've been warned. Hit the music.
You are talking about the nonsensical ravings of a lunatic mind.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
It's alive! It's
Hello and welcome to It's Alive Alive Podcast. This is a true crime, paranormal, interstellar podcast covering unbelievable stories that sound like they were ripped straight from the pages of a Hollywood script. I'm your host, a man of many names, the Outlaw Harley Ray, the Bruiser Bronson, Dr. H.R. Smokenstein, THCO, or you can call me Josh for short. And with me as always is my very own Scream Queen, the perfect combination of beauty and brains, the bride of Smokenstein, the India Hardy, expert of guts and gore, the gorgeous, the sexy Aimee Rose.
Hi.
I forgot to check my levels before I started doing this, so I just need to... I'm good. It took me fucking ages last week to listen to part one of this. I was terrified that it was a complete and utter fuck up.
It wasn't though.
It wasn't. It was fine, but it took me so long. There was so much information from the start. I wasn't too sure if I had explained it all properly or gotten it all in there. And it ended up going 2 hours, so I'm pretty sure I got most of it in there.
I think so.
It seems like today's episode is going to be a bit more easy, a bit more of a flow to it.
Okay.
It should move a little quicker. It's about the size of our usual script, so about just over an hour, hopefully.
Cool.
But I thought last week, when I said it at one point, I think it was like 3/4 of an hour into the show, and I turned around, I was like, we're only halfway there. And I thought to myself, shit, am I after like selling too much of the show now? Yeah. An hour and a quarter later, I'm looking going, shit, we need to hurry up and finish it. But what can you do? There was a lot of information in it. A lot to get through. Like I said, I was getting fucking people's passport, valid dates, issue dates, driver's licenses, birthdays, death dates. Fucking hell. And it just felt like everyone had a story.
Yeah.
And I needed to try and pick. And that's why this week's was a bit easier, because I kind of just... I had to do what I did when I did the Sawyers. I had to sit down and work out who all the main players were, who the important people were, who the important stories were, and how they all interacted and mixed into each other. And that's why this week's was a little easier, because we're really only dealing with 3 people. There's outside people, but there's primarily 3 stories going on here. And I looked at those 3 people, and I looked at the timeline of events of those 3 people, and I just looked at how they all intersected, and I was able to put this all together. Because we said, like, 'cause one thing that was unique last week was that we covered a story about a serial killer, but didn't talk about the serial killer's serial killing.
That's
much.
True. Yeah, much. Yeah.
There was a brief paragraph in 50 pages where we listed the few people he killed while something else was going on.
We did.
This week, probably a little more of... we don't really talk a whole pile about the killing he is doing while this case is going on, but obviously this is all about his case, because this is the first time that Dexter Morgan nearly got caught.
Okay.
So we get into it. When we left it last week, Dexter Morgan had just killed his brother Brian Moser, aka the Ice Truck Killer, burying the last of his past in the process, or so he thought. As the Ice Truck Killer went into the ground, bodies from Dexter's past would rise to the surface, bringing his crimes to light and kicking off the search for what will become known as the Bay Harbour Butcher killings.
Must have been a nerve-wracking experience, but at least he had the inside scoop. He'd know if they were getting close and could go missing. I mean, up until this point, no one suspects him of anything. In fact, it seems like he's pretty well liked amongst his peers at Miami Metro. Like you said last week, he's hiding in plain sight. I still find it amazing that in a building full of cops, not one of them instinctively felt uneasy around him.
Yeah, it seems impossible, all right, especially if you believe cop shows on TV. They're always going off hunches and their gut feeling. So much for that. Except in the case of one man. But by the time this story ends, he'll have wished he had ignored his gut just this one time. That man's name was Sergeant James Doakes of Miami Metro PD Homicide Department.
This guy was believed to be the Bay Harbour Butcher for years, wasn't he?
He was indeed, and today we'll tell the story of just how that came about happening. James Doakes was born the 10th of March 1962 to James Doakes Sr. and Viola Doakes. He had two sisters, Jessie and Ronnie. Ronnie? Yes, Ronnie. And she was a girl. So, yeah.
Okay.
Much of Doakes' early life is unknown, although he may have had a rough childhood as his father was an abusive man working as a butcher. This would later fuel his status as a prime suspect for the Bay Harbour Butcher.
Because he knew how to cook people.
Prior to joining the Miami Metro, Doakes was employed as an operative in the United States Army Rangers. The 75th Ranger Regiment is a special operations unit in the United States Army that handles sensitive assignments. Doakes was part of the Regimental Reconnaissance Detachment that conducted deep recon missions.
They have a really interesting history, actually. American Ranger history predates the American Revolutionary War. Captain Benjamin Church formed Church's Rangers, which fought hostile Native American tribes during King Philip's War. In 1756, Robert Rogers recruited 9 ranger companies to fight in the French and Indian War. They were known as Rogers Rangers. The 75th Regiment's history dates back to these rifle companies organised by Rogers, which made long-range attacks against French forces and their Indian allies and were instrumental in capturing Fort Detroit. During the American Revolutionary War, Rogers served as a loyalist officer on the side of the Crown, and many of his former Rangers served on both sides. One, John Stark, commanded the 1st New Hampshire Regiment, which gained fame at the battles of Bunker Hill and Bennington. Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys in Vermont were also designated as a Ranger unit. In 1775, the Continental Congress later formed 8 companies of expert riflemen to fight in the Revolutionary War. In 1777, this force, commanded by Daniel Morgan, was known as the Corps of Rangers. Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, organised another famous Revolutionary War Ranger element known as Marion's Partisans. Perhaps the most famous Ranger unit in the Revolutionary War was Butler's Rangers from upstate New York. During the War of 1812, companies of United States Rangers were raised from among the frontier settlers as part of the regular army. Throughout the war, they patrolled the frontier from Ohio to western Illinois on horseback and by boat. Rangers participated in many skirmishes and battles with the British and their American Indian allies. After the Civil War, more than half a century passed without Ranger units in the United States.
Sounds like a subject for playing with bones, to be honest with you. So they went missing for 50 years. Why did they bring them back? Why did they bring the unit back at all?
Short answer, World War II. But they were also involved in Korea and Vietnam, and it seems like after Vietnam, they kind of became this special ops group. The modern Ranger battalions were first called upon in 1980 when elements of 1st Ranger Battalion participated in Operation Eagle Claw, the Iranian hostage rescue mission. In October 1983, 1st and 2nd Ranger Battalions spearheaded Operation Urgent Fury, conducting a dangerous low-level parachute assault to seize Point Salines Airfield and rescue American citizens at True Blue Medical Campus in Grenada. Grenada, yeah. The entire 75th Ranger Regiment participated in Operation Just Cause, which lasted from December 1989 to January 1990. Rangers spearheaded the action by conducting 2 important operations. Simultaneous parachute assaults were conducted onto Torrijos Tocumen International Airport, Rio Hato Airfield, and General Manuel Norija's beach house to neutralize Panamanian defense forces. The Rangers captured more than 1,014 prisoners of war and more than 18,000 weapons. Elements of Company B and 1st Platoon Company A, 1st Ranger Battalion, deployed to Saudi Arabia from the 12th of February 1991 to 15th of April 1991 for Operation Desert Storm. They conducted raids and provided a quick reaction force in cooperation with Allied forces. In December 1991, 175 and the regimental headquarters deployed to Kuwait in a force of called Operation Iris Gold. The Rangers performed an airborne assault onto Al Salam airfield near Kuwait City conducted a 50-kilometre foot march through devastation, including minefields left from the ground camp, and conducted a live fire exercise and left on foot.
The Americans really know how to name their operations.
Fucking mouthful.
Operation Desert Storm.
Yeah, well.
Operation Iris Gold. So these guys, anyway, they're the baddest of the badasses by the sounds of things.
Pretty much. And then there was the division Doakes was part of. So based out of Fort Moore, formerly Fort Benning, Georgia, Regimental Reconnaissance. Jesus Christ. Reconnaissance.
Bunch of fucking army been doing a Renaissance fair. they're just cosplaying the original Rangers running around the place.
That'd be class. Reconnaissance Company, or RRC, is among the premier special reconnaissance units of the US military. See, my problem is I just see the word Renaissance first. I miss the C. RRD, as it was originally called, was activated in October 1984 with the formation of the 75th Ranger Regiment headquarters at Fort Benning. The detachment was tasked with providing worldwide reconnaissance and operational preparation of the environment in support of the 75th Ranger Regiment and other units within United States Army Special Operations Command, USASOC and JSOC. Traditionally, RRD was divided into 3 6-man teams, one team to support each of the 3 Ranger battalions. The unit has 3 primary tasks: active reconnaissance, surveillance, and direct action. While performing these tasks, these teams can infiltrate the objective area by parachute, helicopter, fixed-wing aircraft, scuba, small boat, foot, or other means. Remain undetected in the vicinity of the objective area for up to 5 days. Perform reconnaissance operations employing a full range of night observation devices, infrared detection devices, unattended early warning sensors, and photographic equipment. Perform demolition target analysis, operate small watercraft and inflatable boats, and place unattended ground sensors, omnidirectional navigational beacons, hand and placed expandable jammers, and electronic target designation devices. Collect combat information to satisfy priority information requirements and mission essential elements of information. Teams report information by use of long-range, secure burst transmission communication equipment. They perform drop zone selection, marking and reception duties. Report objective area weather conditions. Perform highly selective, limited attacks or ambushes when so tasked. Link up with the main even body of the Ranger force in the objective area, or escape and evade the enemy in order to return to friendly lines.
Sounds like James Bond with an attitude.
That's exactly what I was picturing. Did you ever see Entrapment? Entrapment with Catherine Zeta-Jones and Sean Connery, and they go scuba diving to actually get into the place that they're supposed to be getting thing from. That's what it was reminds me of.
Oh God. It goes a long way to explaining Doakes' personality as well. And you'd be looking at that background and you'd be thinking, why is he not in the FBI? But we'll get to that as well later. I can kind of, because I've only kind of spotted that now myself as well. Well, when we get there, I'll explain it a little bit.
Okay.
See, Doakes was your typical hard-nosed, no-nonsense cop. What he had seen and lived through, what he had to do in the line of duty, had hardened him and made him suspicious of everyone to the point of paranoia. That being said, people close to him have said that once you gained his respect, you met the real Doakes. With his respect brought trust. But to get that respect, you had to work really fucking hard for it. Now, you've already asked how a bunch of cops could live amongst an active serial killer and never suspect a thing. Unfortunately, I have no answer outside Dexter was very good at the whole chameleon thing. But Doakes had extra training, specialised training, that he was well used to sniffing out evil deeds and secrets. He had investigated and taken down tyrannical governments and the world's top criminal power players. So as good as Dexter's mask was, Doakes always had the feeling that there was something just not quite right about, and I quote, that blood geek.
Blood geek, like that's the best you come up with.
Oh, there's more. Through various different interviews with Miami Met employees around the time both Doakes and Dexter worked there, some of Doakes' pet names for Dexter included Psycho, Weirdo, Creep, Freak Show, Sparky, Lizard on Ice. I don't get that one, to be honest. Freaked Hard, and my personal favourite, and a classic, Motherfucker. I could go on, but I think you get the point.
Yeah, Dexter wasn't getting any Christmas cards from Doakes.
Yeah, they pretty much couldn't stand each other. Doakes had taken to keeping an eye on Dexter long before Brian Moser hit the scene and started teasing Dexter by hinting at his work to the Miami detectives. While no one else noticed, Doakes picked up on these subtle hints, and because he had Dexter under private, unsanctioned surveillance, he could see Dexter acting strangely and irrationally throughout the ITK case. His gut was telling him that there was more to the case than just the Deborah Morgan-Rudy Cooper relationship, kidnapping and attempted murder. But Dexter had hidden that information deep, and the sergeant had not yet found the connection. It was for this reason he had eased up on the private surveillance and replaced it with straight-up stalking, following Dexter's every move in plain sight, much to Dexter's annoyance. He hadn't killed since Brian, and he could feel the urge building again. But how could he perform the act, the ritual even, with Doakes watching his every move, like a demonic shadow following him around waiting for him to slip up? But that part of Dexter's life had to take a back seat regardless, because Doakes was the least of his worries. Back home, Dexter wasn't living in domestic bliss either. Things with Rita were shaky. To explain this though, we need to rewind a little bit to before and during last week's timeline. So I knew last week's episode was going to be stuffed with details just dealing with Dexter's family life, with Harry, Deb, Brian, Laura and Joe. And I was right, and the show went like 2 hours. I also knew that Rita would focus more this week and heavily next week, so I decided to just kind of rush through the essential details to the relationship last week, stuff that was just relevant to pushing the Morgan Moser story forward. So let's have a quick look at the history and background of Dexter and Rita's relationship and what was happening in the background last week as we dealt with Brian Moser and the ice truck killer.
Great. I've been dying to know the backstory, and all I've been picturing is a Hallmark movie where the love of Rita melts Dexter's heart and he repents for his crimes and becomes a good person, and they live happily ever after.
If you want that, then go to the Disney verse or the Hallmark verse. This is the horror verse. We don't do happy endings, or in this case, even happy beginnings. But you are a tiny bit right. Rita does soften Dexter just a little bit, and it is believed he had some sort of genuine connection and affection towards both her and her 2 children, Astor and Cody.
So Rita is a divorcee?
In the process when she met Dexter. She was still married to a man named Paul Bennett, who was at the time in prison on a rape and domestic abuse conviction. Paul Bennett was born to Bill Bennett and his wife Maura, who lived in Orlando, Florida. Much of Paul's early life prior to meeting Rita Brandon was her name, is unknown except that she was prone to getting in trouble. Rita was born in Michigan to Gail Brandon, but moved to Miami where she met and married Paul. They soon had 2 children from the relationship, Astor and Cody. They lived in a house that Paul had obtained through a drug trade before they met. Paul frequently abused his wife, but one night in particular, when he repeatedly beat and raped Rita, his daughter Astor called the police. Officer Deborah Morgan was the first to respond on the scene to the domestic violence report. Paul was promptly arrested. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison, but was released after only 6 due to overcrowding and good behaviour.
18 months only for rape and domestic abuse.
He blamed his heroin addiction. He was a good boy in jail, went to the drug counselor, underwent treatment and anger management courses in prison, all that sort of shit.
I assume Deb is the one who introduced Dexter to Rita.
Yeah. Deborah, being the type of cop she was, befriended Rita, checking up on her frequently after Paul's arrest and conviction. She encouraged her to get back out there and set her up with her single brother, who begrudgingly took the date, remembering Harry's code that he should blend in. Their first date was awkward for both of them. Rita had just escaped a dangerous relationship, and Dexter was, well, a serial killer.
Right.
Dexter, not seeing a future for him in any sort of relationship, used this date as an opportunity to watch for his next target, a man named Michael Marcetti. When Marcetti stood up to leave, Dexter followed suit. To be polite, he paid for dinner, saying that he was ill and it was a pleasure to meet her. Rita called Dexter later that night while he was discarding Marcetti's body parts into the ocean. She asked how he was feeling, told him about her 2 kids and the domestic problems, but he said that Deborah had already told him. Rita remarked that he seemed to know all about her, with Dexter replying that he would like to know more. He suggested that they get together again sometime, and Rita liked that idea.
Do you think Dexter could relate to Rita, a single mother with 2 kids trying to get away from an abusive man? I'm very close to his own mother's story. Just Rita was lucky to get away from her husband, whereas Laura was stuck with Joe and the cartel for as long as Harry Morgan said so.
Never thought of it like that, but it does make sense. They do seem like similar circumstances, but I think Laura was a higher stakes situation.
I don't know if he was beating and raping her when he was arrested. You can be guaranteed the behaviour would escalate and Rita would have eventually been killed by the animal.
Most likely. That's kind of what happens in all the other stories we read.
Yeah.
So 6 months isn't all that long. So while Dexter was running around Miami after his brother Paul got his early release, and it didn't take long for him to show up at Rita's door, hat in hand, apologising for his past behaviour, promising he had changed.
I hope she doesn't think of taking him back.
Not for a second. And Paul acknowledged and seemingly accepted this. What he was actually there for was to request visitation with his kids, to which Rita agreed to supervise visits under strict conditions. Number one being Paul stays clean and Paul controls his temper.
Rita taking the high road. I hate when parents use kids as leverage to never break up.
Then prepared to hate Paul even more. Paul went over the top. Presents, trips to the theme park, sweets, everything was with Paul was fun. Obviously a ploy to make him the fun dad, putting pressure on Dexter's competition and making Rita look like the irrational mom. A ploy that began to work on Cody, but Astor still remembered the night she had to call the police, and she was a little slower to be won over by her recently paroled parent. As the days went on, Paul was constantly showing up unannounced at the Bennett household, much to the annoyance of both Dexter and Rita. As the days went by and Paul was making no headway with Rita, his true colours began to bleed through again. According to Rita, he grabbed her once in a threatening way and on more than one occasion made veiled threats towards Dexter as well. Last week we spoke about Dexter and Rita going out of town to settle the affairs of Joe Driscoll, Dexter's biological father. This enraged Paul, and when she returned, he turned up at her home intoxicated and, like old times, made moves to rape his estranged wife. Luckily, the past trauma had taught Rita to sleep with a baseball bat by the bed, and she whacked Paul and left for Dexter's apartment.
Did she go to the cops and press charges?
That was the plan for the next morning, but before she could, Paul had gone to the police with a story of his own, claiming Rita attacked him for no reason, and he was pressing charges. To get the charges dropped, he wanted joint custody and Dexter out of the picture.
Fuck's sake, this guy is a full-on scumbag. God, I wish he killed someone so Dexter could get him.
Don't worry, he wasn't long for this world. Paul was found in his motel room with a needle hanging from his arm. An anonymous tip called it in. He also had a small stash of heroin on him. This was an instant breach of his parole, so he was sent straight back to prison with new charges pending for drug possession. He played his innocence to Rita by repeatedly calling the landline phone. He swore Dexter attacked him in the kitchen and he lost a shoe in the scuffle. Next thing he remembered, he was waking up with the cops cuffing him. Soon after that, Paul was killed in a prison fight.
So what happened with the shoe?
Irrationally, Rita felt guilty for Paul's death. Like something she had done had caused his incarceration and in turn his death. This led her to investigate the shoe claim a little further, and sure enough, in the front yard bushes, she found a lone shoe, Paul's shoe.
Oh, Dexter's in trouble.
In more than one way. You see, Rita wasn't the only one unearthing evidence of Dexter's misdeeds, and while Rita contemplated how to deal with Dexter's part in Paul's death, Dexter was at home with Deborah, who had been living with him temporarily while she dealt with the whole Rudy, Brian, ITK trauma and betrayal. It was her who brought the news to Dexter's attention. Divers training around the Bay Harbour had discovered a graveyard, dozens of refuge sacks filled with dismembered body parts, Dexter's dismembered body parts. When they were all fished out, 18 bodies in total were recovered. They would become known as the Bay Harbour 18. So 18 new bodies only months after the end of the ITK case, and with higher numbers too. This case attracted national attention as the forensics they could pull from these corpses showed that a serial killer had secretly been active for years in Miami, and soon they realised it was all done right under Miami Metro's nose. This being such a high-profile case, the FBI was assigned to assist Miami Met homicide detectives in the identification and apprehension of the Bay Harbour Butcher. In fact, it was so high-profile that they sent a rock star of killer profiling, that being FBI Special Agent Frank Lundy. Lundy had a stellar career filled with huge achievements. In his time with the agency, he was instrumental in tracking down and apprehending such high-profile killers as the Green River Killer Gary Ridgway and the Washington snipers John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo.
I've always found the Ridgway case interesting. He was initially convicted of 48 separate murders committed between the early 1980s and late 1990s. As part of his plea bargain, another conviction was added, bringing the total number of convictions to 49, making him the second most prolific serial killer in United States history, according to confirmed numbers. Most of Ridgway's victims were alleged to be sex workers and other women in vulnerable circumstances, including underage runaways. Before his identity was known, the media gave him his nickname after the first 5 victims were found in the Green River. He strangled his victims usually by hand, but sometimes using ligatures. After strangling them, he would dump their bodies in forested and overgrown areas in Kings County, often returning to the bodies to engage in acts of necrophilia. Ridgway had been a suspect in the murders since 1982 when he was arrested for prostitution. However, investigators were unable to link him to the murders at that time. Later advances in DNA profiling allowed investigators to definitively link Ridgway to the murders, and he was arrested on November 30th, 2001, as he was leaving the Kenworth truck factory where he worked in Renton, Washington. As part of the plea bargain wherein he agreed to disclose the locations of the still missing women, he was spared the death penalty and received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
He is just... do you know he had like a really low IQ? Really low IQ.
See that? Like, how the fuck do you get away with that with such a low IQ?
I had 3 wives. 3 women loved this man. 4 women if you count his mom. But I think she wasn't exactly nice to him.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah.
I think he used to wet the bed a lot, and she used to give him shit for it, like, you know, make him like wash his own sheets and hang him out, and kind of be calling him Gary Pissy Pants and all this kind of shit.
You could marry someone without loving them.
Huh? But they say that his third wife actually did prevent him from killing. That the love of his third wife prevented him, because he didn't actually kill anybody while he was with his third wife, and she believes that the relationship they had prevented him from killing at the time. He was very religious.
Okay.
And that was the thing. When were we talking about missionary killers there lately? It was only in the last few days. We were talking about missionary killers. Oh, no, we weren't. We will be talking about missionary killers in a few minutes. But, it's this kind of fucking thing of, you know, I think he thought he was a missionary killer, but really, like,
doing the word of God, but with a gun.
You're killing. He's killing these women because they're prostitutes, but at the same time, he's having sex with them first and then murdering them. So I mean, pretty fucking much, which makes him the perfect Christian.
Fucking men, huh?
I think the Washington snipers scare me more, though. Mainly because it was so random and came out of nowhere. I mean, I know I'm safe from Ridgway. I'm not a sex worker. But snipers kill indiscriminately.
The DC sniper attacks, also known as the Beltway sniper attacks, were a series of coordinated shootings that occurred during 3 weeks in October 2002 throughout the Washington metropolitan area, consisting of the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia, and preliminary shootings that consisted of murders and robberies in several states and lasted for 6 months starting in February 2002. 7 people were killed and 7 others were injured in the preliminary shootings, and 10 people were killed and 3 others were critically wounded in the October shootings. In total, the snipers killed 17 people and wounded 10 others in a 10-month span. The snipers were 2 men, John Allen Muhammad, aged 41 at the time, and Lee Boyd Malvo, aged 17 at the time, who travelled in a blue 1990 Chevrolet Caprice sedan. In 2003, Muhammad was sentenced to death, and in 2009, he was executed by lethal injection. Malvo, a juvenile, received 6 life sentences in Maryland and 3 in Virginia. In 2017, Malvo's life sentences in Virginia were vacated without parole on appeal.
What does that mean? Does that mean he got off?
Vacated without, so it's not parole. You're
He's just released.
I think, as far as I know.
It was 2017. Did you hear what the motive for the crimes were?
No.
Jesus Christ, this is absolutely fucking bonkers.
Okay.
Investigators and prosecution suggested during pre-trial motions that Muhammad intended to kill his second ex-wife, Mildred, who he felt had estranged him from his children. So this is going back into using your kids against you. According to this hypothesis, the other shootings were intended as cover-up and a motive for the crime.
But you might have gotten away with that first crime if you didn't go killing everybody else.
Yeah, Muhammad believed that the police would not focus on an estranged ex-husband as a suspect if Mildred appeared to be a random victim of a serial killer. It is not a bad idea, to be fair.
Not a bad idea, but doing 6 months worth of it is overkill.
During the attacks, Muhammad frequented the neighborhood where she lived, and some of the incidents occurred nearby. Additionally, he had earlier made threats against her. Mildred herself said that she was an intended target, claiming that when the police first approached her, one officer said, Miss Muhammad, didn't you know you were a target? However, Judge Elroy F. Millett Jr. prevented prosecutors from presenting this theory during trial, saying that the link had not been firmly established. While imprisoned, Malvo wrote a number of erratic diatribes about what he termed the jihad against the United States. A jihad, I don't know, what is it? The jihad or a jihad? I have been accused on my mission. Allah knows I am going to suffer now. Oh, I'm in trouble for doing that.
I was
Because his rants and drawings featured not only such figures as Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, but also characters from the film The Matrix.
Jesus Christ, what a crossover.
These musings were dismissed.
Figures like Bin Laden doing the weird, like Ben Bar.
No, Osama bin Laden is 100% morphine.
No, it's just birds.
And I'm not taking any pill that fast. Some investigators reportedly said they had all but eliminated terrorist ties or political ideologies as a motive. Nonetheless, in at least one of the ensuing murder trials, a Virginia court found Muhammad guilty of killing pursuant to the direction or order of terrorism. At the 2006 trial of Muhammad, Malvo testified that the aim of the killing spree was to kidnap children for the purpose of extorting money from the government and to set up a camp to train children how to terrorize cities, with the ultimate goal being to shut things down across the United States. Malvo also stated that Muhammad was driven by his hatred for white people and his belief that the white man is the devil. His plan was to kill 6 white people per day for 30 days, and he told Malvo he wanted him to shoot a pregnant white woman. That's fucked up. I don't know why the rest, but that particular one is that's messed up. Which one do you believe? I think, to be fair, I am not praising it. I'm not saying it's a fucking good thing to do.
I understand the thinking,
especially since they always check the husbands or ex-partners or ex-husbands first. It was a very smart idea to make it seem like it's a part of a random crime spree. Do you know? If he had just, like you said, maybe went on a killing spree for like a week and went missing.
Yeah.
And left it at that.
Or like a few hours, got 2 other people and fucked off.
Yeah.
Not fucking condoning it. It makes it sound like they were fucking like OJ if I do it.
Ideas of how to get away with it, it wouldn't have been a bad idea. But then going off of his Muslim matrix.
No, you see, okay. I believe the 2 of them, right? Okay, I believe because it's just so like a matter of fact story. I believe that was probably Muhammad's. But then I also believe that maybe Malvo believed that that's what he was doing and he lost
no, I was going to say that. I'd say Muhammad had Malvo told this is what we're doing. I don't think he knew what was really going on in Muhammad's head. I'd say this Muhammad guy was absolutely batshit crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And Malvo ended up, and by this looks of it, if he was getting off with it afterwards, I'd say it was just a young kid kind of...
But like, you know, as a 17-year-old...
groomed to do this shit, you know? But
like if somebody approached you as okay, obviously you're not going to go running off and kill somebody, but I mean, like, you're not going to run off with someone that goes, oh, I hate my ex-wife, as opposed to we're going to do this for the world. You're like, oh yeah, you know, I can go.
No, we're going to do this for Allah.
Well,
it's against the white man and against the white devil.
Yeah, to make the world.
I hate that though, that pregnant white woman thing.
That's disgusting.
Because that's always the part of the Manson story that creeps me out the most as well, was that Sharon Tate was pregnant. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just that she was begging for her life. She begged them to just leave her live long enough to give birth to the child, and then they could kill her afterwards. Yeah. You know, and they were just mocking her about it. Like, you know, it just seems
disgusting.
Absolutely nasty. So, as you can see, Lundy he was a very experienced guy when it came to serial killer apprehension. These aren't exactly lightweight, fucking low-level killers.
I wouldn't want to be Dexter right now.
And for good reason. The bodies were laid out in an air-conditioned field morgue for forensic testing and autopsies, and a task force was set up to begin the investigation. That task force consisted of Special Agent Lundy, Officer Deborah Morgan, Detective Angel Batista, Lieutenant Esme Pascal, Captain Thomas Matthews, and Deputy Director Max Adams. In forensics, the team used Vince Masuka, Miami Met forensic specialist, marine biologist Dr. Manny Pina, and, to his relief, blood spatter specialist Dexter Morgan. Not included in the special task force was highly decorated, highly respected Sergeant James Doakes.
If he's held in such high regard, why was he left out?
Well, this is what we were talking about earlier on, why he wasn't in the FBI as well. Doakes was a good detective, but not what you would call a team player. Lundy felt that Doakes' style was that of a great leader, but in this case he required cooperation. He needed a team player, and with that he was relegated to the bench. Doakes was a little hurt that he was passed over for this position, but he was quick to reconcile that he was already way too busy chasing down Dexter's secrets to be on the Bay Harbour Butcher case anyway.
So I take it Doakes likes to be the bad cop in interrogation.
But Doakes was permanently bad cop.
Oh.
Doakes had seen a lot in service of the United States Army Rangers. And Doakes had done a lot in service of the United States Army Rangers. And these actions he witnessed were not ones easily forgotten. Those close to Doakes said although he was always no nonsense, he did soften around trusted family and friends. But his time as a special operative had damaged him. His view on the world was cynical, his trust in people shattered. He was a very paranoid man is what I'm trying to say. A trait that wouldn't help his image as the investigation moved forward. Doakes seemed to be a man on a mission, like a one-man army determined to clean up humanity. If he had had the money to fund it, there's no doubt in my mind he would have become a very, very mean Batman. It's just a theory, but I think that whatever it was he was involved with in Haiti left a mark on his conscience, and his dedication bordering on obsession with justice was almost like his attempt to wash off that mark that was on him.
Balance the scales.
Exactly. Most of the operations Doakes served on are still to this day classified information, so we don't know exactly what his missions were. You ran through the job description a little earlier, so we know it's high-risk James Bond meets SWAT team kind of shit like. The little we can stitch together about his past military career are from the actions and odd statements of James Doakes himself. Doakes, in hindsight, was a man suffering severely from PTSD, causing him to anger quickly and sometimes act a little erratically. I'm sure nearly everyone knows what PTSD is and the cause of it, but just in case, do you want to give the listeners a little quick rundown on it?
PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is a mental and behavioural disorder that develops from experiencing a traumatic event such as sexual assault, warfare, traffic collisions, child abuse, domestic violence, or other threats on a person's life or well-being. Symptoms may include disturbing thoughts, feelings, or dreams related to the events, mental or physical distress to trauma-related cues, attempts to avoid trauma-related cues, alterations in the way a person thinks and feels, and an increase in the fight or flight response. A person with PTSD is at a higher risk of suicide and intentional self-harm.
The big takeaway there for me is the increase in the fight or flight response, because Doakes was quick to anger and always ready for a fight. Something that would see him get reprimanded at Miami Metro regularly.
So he would have to have been in Haiti during the Duvalier dynasty, meaning he would probably have been up against Tonton Macoute.
Yep, that ties into a story in a few minutes, but do you want to give a small background on what they were?
Yeah. The Tonton Macoute, or simply the Macoute, was a Haitian paramilitary and secret police force created in 1959 by dictator Francois Papa Doc Duvalier. Haitians named this force after the Haitian mythological boogeyman, Tonton Macoute, which is translated to English as Uncle Gunnysack.
That sounds funny.
Am I saying that name right?
What?
Tonton Macoute.
Tonton Macoute. Macoute, yeah.
After the July 1958 Haitian coup d'etat attempt against President Francois Duvalier, he purged the army and law enforcement agencies in Haiti and executed numerous officers as he perceived them as a threat to his regime. To counteract this threat, he created a military force that bore several names. In 1959, his paramilitary force was called the Cagalards, or the Hooded Men. They were renamed to the Milice Civile, or the Civilian Militia, and after 1962, they became the Volontaires de la Sécurité Nationale, or the Volunteers of National Security. They began to be called the Tonton Macoute when people started to disappear for no apparent reason. The group answered to Papa Doc only.
Sounds like the Gestapo.
Yeah. Duvalier authorised the Tonton Macoutes to commit systematic violence and human rights abuses to suppress political opposition.
See?
They were responsible for unknown numbers of murders and rapes in Haiti. Political opponents often disappeared overnight or were sometimes attacked in broad daylight. Tontons Macoutes stoned and burned people alive. Many times they put the corpses of their victims on display, often hung in trees for everyone to see and take as warnings against opposition. Family members who tried to remove the bodies for proper burial often disappeared. Anyone who challenged the VSN risked assassination. Their unrestrained state terrorism was accompanied by corruption, extortion, and personal aggrandizement among the leadership. The victims of Tonton Macoutes could range from women in the poorest of neighbourhoods who had previously supported an opposing politician to businessmen who refused to comply with extortion threats, ostensibly as donations for public works, but which were in fact the source of profit, corrupt officials, and even President Duvalier. The Tonton Macoute murdered between 30,000 and 60,000 Haitians.
Fucking hell.
That's crazy. Lochner Cambron led the Tonton Macoute throughout the 1960s and the beginning of the 1970s. His cruelty earned him the nickname the Vampire of the Caribbean.
Ooh, he sounds like a guy we could cover on fucking Real Monsters.
Absolutely. This particular name was earned by one of his endeavours of extorting blood plasma from locals for sale. Cambron did this through his company, Hemo Caribbean, and that's a catchy name, and shipped 5 tons of plasma per month to US labs. He would also sell cadavers to medical schools after buying them from Haitian hospitals for $3 per corpse. When the hospital,
fucking hair made more than that.
I know, yeah. When the hospital could not supply this, the local funeral homes would be used. In 1971, Duvalier died, and his widow Simone and son Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier ordered Cambron into exile. Cambron moved to Miami, Florida, US, where he lived until his death in 2006.
Oh, Dexter got him.
Maybe. When Francois Duvalier came to power in 1957, voodoo was becoming celebrated for its purely Haitian heritage by intellectuals and the griots after having been let go for years by those with education. The Tonton Macoute was heavily influenced by voodoo tradition, with denim uniforms resembling clothing like Zacameda, the patron of farmers, and the use of the machete in symbolic reference to Ogun, a great general in voodoo tradition. Some of the most important members of the Tonton Macoute were voodoo leaders. This religious affiliation gave them a kind of an earthly authority in the eyes of the public. From their methods to their choice of clothes, voodoo was always played an important role in their actions. The Tonton Macoute wore straw hats, blue denim shirts, and dark glasses, and were armed with machetes and guns. Both their allusions to the supernatural and their physical presentations were used with the intention of instilling fear and respect. Even their title of Tonton Macoute was embedded in Haitian lore of a boogeyman who took children away in his satchel or his macoute. The Tonton Macoute were a ubiquitous presence at the polls in 1961 when Duvalier held a presidential referendum in which the official vote count was an outrageous and fraudulent 1,320,748 to 0, electing him to another term. They appeared in force again at the polls in 1964 when Duvalier held a constitutional referendum that declared him president for life.
Sounds like Putin with his 5th presidential reign in Russia.
Did he get any votes against him, I wonder, or did he make it seem kind of legit?
Oh, I don't fucking know. I don't follow their shit. Is Haiti still that bad?
I don't think so, because when we did debating with Concern in secondary school, you went, if you won the All-Ireland finals, you got to go with Concern over to Haiti for a few weeks. And we were secondary school children, that they're not bad. Sure, they're not going to let us all over. But the girls that the year before,
not going to be
went,
taken by the gunny sack, man.
Exactly. But no, the girls that went before us had a brilliant time. They loved it. They said that when they came back, or like the difference, it is still a very, very poor country. Like the difference coming back then, it kind of made it feel a bit like.
Sounds terrifying. So obviously dealing with all that, seeing all that, it hardened Doakes and at times could make him seem a little unhinged. One example of this came around the time he had been stalking Dexter and would end up giving Dexter a slight reprieve from his uninvited and unwanted chaperone shadow. So there is this incident. I don't have a whole pile on it, but apparently around the time he was supposed to be following Dexter, he was out with Detective Batista, who we have spoken about a few times. The poor man who was stabbed last in the last episode, whose wife wouldn't take him back after he was a ball boy.
Yep.
Anyway, they were out and they were in a car, and Doakes demanded that the car get pulled over. He spotted someone on the side of the road. He got out of the car, he started roaring a name, and this man ran away. They ended up running under this bridge, and Batista chased after him. When Batista got there, he heard a gunshot, and when he got there, the guy that Doakes had been chasing was dead on the floor.
Okay.
Doakes, there was a gun next to that man, and Doakes claimed that he shot first, but Batista swore he only heard one gunshot.
Okay.
Now, it turned out then when they looked into it, that this man he killed, who was going at the time by the name Jacques Bayard. Jacques Bayard. I can't speak any French. But it was really, her real name was René Thibault. And he had been an officer of the Makute death squad, ordering rape, mass murder, and torture of many, many Haitian people. And it was someone who Doakes had been trying to get for a long time when he was a special ops, a ranger. Yeah. So, obviously, Batista, internal affairs got brought in when Batista claimed that he had only heard one gunshot. And an investigation went on. Obviously, fucking Doakes was swearing that there was a shot fired at him first. It didn't appear that way. The evidence didn't appear that way. It looked like he had just killed this guy because he knew he did a Dexter on it. Yeah. You know, he had the evidence and he knew the evidence was there. He just couldn't prove it properly. So that's what I reckon happened. Okay. Batista wasn't exactly too happy about it though, because Batista came forward, staked his name, got himself in trouble for being a rat amongst his own peers. And then certain special ops people came in and said that information about Mr. René Thibault was classified and that Doakes was committed a justified murder in self-defense, and it was to be all dropped and never mentioned again. Batista was bullied a little bit, but to kind of big him up a little bit, Doakes respected that he had stuck to his guns. Yeah. And when people gave Batista shit, he stood up for him. And kind of gained his respect a little bit in that sense. Because, I mean, look, no one really knows what happened. Did he shoot for who shot first? It is a real Han Solo situation. Yeah. But we don't know. But Batista they did have a respect for each other at that stage. And I think maybe Batista, knowing the background afterwards, that maybe he understood a little better as well why, but he was pissed off just because of the stigma that will be on him for coming forward on one of his fellow police officers. Anyway, in the meantime, Rita was still trying to process and decide how to deal with the Dexter Paul situation. This is a woman who, before Dexter, had been in an abusive relationship full of lying, cheating, and constant deceit. She just got rid of Paul, and this needed to be a fresh start. So she decided the only way to deal with this situation was head on, confronting Dexter that evening when he returned from work. Obviously, Dexter's head was swimming. He was in the middle of a serial killer crisis, so this revelation of his confrontation with Paul was extra stress that he didn't need. So she came to him. She basically said, this is what Paul had said before his death. He had been making these claims. I ignored him, but I went outside and I found this shoe. How can you explain this? Okay. Dexter confessed. He said it was a moment of absolute madness. That it was just a case of Paul had made another threat at him in the kitchen. He snapped, and before he knew it, he was setting Paul up and putting him into the motel room with the syringe in his arm. Okay. Now, Rita questions why Dexter had a bag of heroin and a syringe. Then she starts to think, well, this is this guy who I've been going out with for so long, but who is constantly going missing at the drop of a hat. Constantly has these secret projects and nights out where I don't see him for a couple of days at a time. And when I ask him about stuff, he never really gives me a straight answer. Sidesteps. Dexter, in the meantime, is in the middle of a bit of a fucking meltdown over these fucking bodies being found. And kind of half admits in a way that he has an addiction.
Okay.
And Rita confuses Dexter's killing addiction for a drug addiction.
Okay.
Now, most women, now to be fair, who have just come out of an abusive relationship with a drug addict, will probably boot you out the door.
Yeah.
But she was like, look, we can get through this together.
Yeah.
You just need to go to A&E and we need to fucking hit this head on and you need to stay away from these drugs and we can do this and we can be a family and happy and all this shit. So she sends him to A&E and he agrees to go to A&E because it gets her off his back and lets him just fucking get a breather and not have to deal with this problem. So he goes to A&E and instantly he it's A&E, you have to come up, you have to say a few bits and pieces about yourself. But he kind of veils all his kill talk in as if it's drugs.
Okay.
And he ends up getting his sponsor, who is this woman named Lila. Now, Lila's background turns out to be a bit sketchy as well. We'll get into that in a few minutes. But Rita wasn't too happy with Lila. Because Lila was a good-looking girl. And was very enthusiastic about being Dexter's sponsor.
Okay.
So, and she knew that Dexter was going to be spending a lot of time with this lady. Now, another upside to this NA thing is that, and I suppose it did help that Doakes had a lot of the internal affairs bullshit to be dealing with, but he did spot Dexter going into the NA meeting. And when he came out, he approached Dexter and confronted him about it. And he kind of said, look, if this is, I always had a feeling you were hiding something. This is what you were hiding. A lot of cops have went down that road. What we have to deal with is rough. And he had a bit of sympathy for Dexter. And he's eased up on Dexter because of that. He thought he could. I mean, this revelation was a bit of a relief for Doakes, to be honest. He always knew something was up with Dexter. And this information was like confirmation that his instincts were still finely tuned. So the investigation began with the full recovery and forensic examination of the Bay Harbour 18. So obviously with time and the water current, some of these body parts had moved around, plus they're all dismembered. So first thing that had to be done was to erect a mobile air-conditioned field morgue so that they could match the limbs to the right body and try to preserve any evidence or sign of time of death. It didn't take long to establish that the body count was 18, and a quick examination showed many common traits to confirm all the bodies were the work of the same killer. The times of deaths were a bit murky though, due to the air conditioning unit malfunctioning, causing the bodies to turn overnight, and again, we're in super hot Miami heat, So with the time of death out the window, the next step was to identify the bodies, and this is where the task force caught a break. Identification showed that all victims had one thing in common. They had been accused of murder and gotten off on a technicality, or they were suspected of murder and were never apprehended due to lack of evidence. Lundy and Deborah, who was now stuck to Lundy's hip, hypothesized that they were dealing with a vigilante killer or a mission killer. We were talking about this earlier, now let's get into it.
He does sound like a mission killer, to be fair. I mean, we know killing killers is just a means to an end for Dexter, but to people who don't know his unique upbringing and training, it does seem like he is a mission killer. A mission killer believes, like a vigilante, that they are justified in murder because the people they kill are usually criminals, murderers, or just lawbreakers in general. There may be people out there saying, well, what harm? Who's going to miss a criminal? But I have to point out that Gary Ridgway, or the Green River Killer we just spoke of earlier, believed himself to be a mission killer, killing prostitutes because they were breaking the law of the land and the law of God by selling their bodies. Never mind the fact that he slept or raped them all before he killed them.
Not that it's a big deal or really relevant to the story at this point, but Lundy and Deborah were hooking up at this stage in the investigation.
Okay.
So, with the murder charge dropped from Eternal Affairs, Doakes was back at work and back snooping around his favourite blood spatter analyst. See, David had kind of dropped the ball in the NA cover, mocking Doakes at the suggestion that Dexter was in recovery. Apparently, according to her, he had never so much as smoked a cigarette.
Okay.
So,
good job, Debs.
So, in the meantime, Dexter is actually using Lila in recovery. If you remember last episode, and even at the start of this episode, I mentioned that the hardest part for him killing Brian Moser, his brother, was he was losing someone who completely understood him.
Yeah.
Who accepted him for who he was and what he was. And Lila, even though she believed it to be drugs, accepted him for what he was, accepted him for what he needed, and he opened up to her. And he told her a lot about his mother and how she died. And they ended up Lila kind of encouraged him to follow down that route and keep, like Brian, to start looking into his background a bit more. Where Brian wanted to reawaken the darkness in him, she was trying to find, what was it that was setting him off, what led him into his addiction.
Yeah.
So they looked him up and they found that there was 3 men involved. Obviously, we've spoken of one of those men last week. Can't really remember the names. I know one of them was an Estrada. But one of them was dead, one of them was in jail, and the other one was Santos Jimenez. And he was still out and about in Florida. He owned, as far as I know, he owned a bit of a dive bar in Florida.
Okay.
So she suggests that maybe they go down and they, face him. Talk to him and see what happens.
Okay.
So they head down there and... obviously, Dexter doesn't tell Rita exactly who he's going with, but he's going out of town.
Yeah.
And he goes out of town. And he goes to find Jimenez himself.
Okay.
And he has a bit of a back and forth with Jimenez, kind of tells him who he is. And he gets him, he beats him pretty badly. And he has him in position to kill him, but holds back.
Okay.
And instead, goes back to Lila. And talks to Lila, and Lila basically like a sponsor. Oh, you did good. You brought yourself to the point where you stopped yourself. And then she starts to tell him a little more about her background. And this is where Lila starts to get a bit suspect.
Oh, shit.
Because Lila because she didn't know exactly what her addiction was either.
Yeah.
And it turns out it was methamphetamines was her addiction. And that she's an English lady, and while in England, she, while high, got extremely possessive of her boyfriend.
Oh, shit.
And after a big fight with him, burnt down his apartment with him inside it. And he died.
Okay.
Now, apparently, the boyfriend was a bit abusive towards her as well.
Okay.
So Dexter asked her, was he a bad man? She said yes, and he said it was okay then.
Okay.
And he then cuddled into her in the bed and stayed there with her for the night.
Well, that's emotional cheating, isn't it?
Oh. Anyway. When he gets back, Rita wants to know more about Lila. She still doesn't know about Florida. Them going to Florida together, down to Florida together.
Yeah.
But she wants to get to know her a bit better. Wants to know who her boyfriend is spending all his time with.
Yeah.
And they have dinner together where it kind of comes out that they did spend the night together with each other in Florida. And Rita boots Dexter out the fucking door in anger. And that's when Dexter sleeps with. Yeah, well, he thought it was over. He thought it was broken up. He ended up sleeping together. So it seems like Rita and Dexter are kaput, according to Dexter anyway, and what he had to say about the situation.
Okay.
But he still had a connection to the kids, so he went to see Cody in a school play. Mm-hmm. Coincidentally, the same time he went to see Cody at the school play, he got a phone call telling him that Lila's apartment was on fire and she was in hysterics. Okay. So he went down there. He obviously comforted her. She said, because she was an artist as well, and she dealt with flames in her work. She liked to this torch to look on her art and stuff like that. Yeah. And it was a fire that got out of hand because of that. So it was a good excuse.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, you think after what she just told you about her boyfriend,
that you wouldn't be going down.
So she again is a possessive type. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he was kind of starting to see it a little bit at this point. But again, he got a lot fucking on. Mm-hmm. Times are busy in the Bay Harbour Butcher's fucking diary. He's trying to cover shit up left, right, and centre.
He makes
evidence is popping up. More and more evidence is popping up, and he's got to make it disappear. As this was all going on, Doakes was looking closer into Dexter's life. He discovered the files that linked Harry Morgan to Laura Moser, the confidential informant killed in the Miami shipyard massacre, mother of two, Brian Moser, aka the Ice Truck Killer, and Dexter Moser, later adopted by Detective Harry Morgan. Finally, the connection was made. Now all he had to do was prove that Brian and Dexter shared more than DNA and a fucked up past, but to do that, he'd have to dig a little bit deeper. Only thing is, Dexter's contacts in the filing room tipped him off about Doakes snooping, and he was ready to deal with the determined sergeant when he came knocking at his lab full of questions Dexter couldn't answer. So now we have already discussed the fact that Doakes is a hot-headed, quick to fucking anger, hot-blooded man. Easy to piss off. Dexter also knew this. He was very well aware of it. So while they were in the confines of his little tiny office where no one could see him, he got close to Doakes, threw him a little insult, and then threw him a quick headbutt. And walked right out of his fucking office before Doakes knew what hit him.
Yeah.
And then while he was amongst all the other cops in the bull pits, all the other sergeants, all the other higher-ups, Doakes comes charging out of the room after the man he has been stalking, because Dexter had already made complaints about Doakes following him. And Doakes was obviously very verbal, and everybody knew he had a problem with Dexter. So this man comes barging out of Dexter's fucking office, attacks Dexter, and Dexter makes no attempt to
defend himself. Okay.
So Doakes starts throwing wild punches at Dexter, causing Doakes to be restrained or temporarily arrested until Dexter said he didn't want to press charges, and suspended until further notice. So gun was taken, badge was taken, he was sent the fuck home. The suspension couldn't have come at a better time for Dexter. New evidence had just come up in the case, and the last thing he needed was Doakes breathing down his neck while he tried to figure out a plan to deal with it. You see, Dexter had been using rocks to weigh down the bags that he had been dumping overboard. He had been getting the rocks from the dockyard where he docked his boat.
Oh boy.
And the very, very intelligent marine biologist that they had on staff had established that the rocks in the bag had come from said docks.
Yeah.
So they now knew where the killer docked his boat. Dexter needed to get his boat the fuck out of there without them noticing.
Yep.
So he went down there, and first thing he did was clean the boat fucking spotless. UV light, everything.
Yeah.
Cleaned it spotless and started making plans to move it. He found out the next day after going down there to clean it with a UV light spotless while he thought about where he was going to move it, that the police actually had it already under surveillance and there was a camera on the place.
Oh, shit.
It hadn't been checked yet, though.
Okay.
He was lucky. He had the insider track. He had Deborah telling him what was going on.
Yeah.
So before anybody else got in, he was able to get in there and delete the video just in time before they saw it.
Oh, thank God.
So they just thought it was a fuck up. The feed had fucked up that night. So they were going to try again the next night. But now he needed to get the boat out of there fucking quick.
Oh, yeah.
So after the video was deleted, that's what he did. He got the boat out of there, got it into a new docking place. Safe for the time being.
Yeah.
But unfortunately for Dexter, when one fire was put out, another would spring up. This time, one of his own making. Dexter sent a phony manifesto to the task force at Miami Met, hoping to confuse the detectives and keep them off his trail long enough for him to make sure he cleaned up any trace of evidence he may have left behind over the years.
Careless. If he had followed Harry's code as much as he spoke about it, then he would have had nothing to worry about.
True enough, but if you were in his position, regardless of how careful you were, you'd still be super paranoid. It only makes it worse that you have to sit there and watch your sister and her new boyfriend get closer and closer to unearthing your secret life and sending you to the execution chamber.
Yeah.
Anyway, the manifesto was a bust, and his policing knowledge bled through in the way it was written. Lundy was a specialist in the field, and he knew after just one read that the manifesto was a distraction and it was written with police insider knowledge. Because of that, along with other lesser evidence collected, Lundy changed the course of his investigation, and instead of looking out around Miami, he looked inward to Miami Metro PD. Lundy demanded to see all records and reports of all the homicide detectives' past casework within the rough time frame they have for the Bay Harbour Butcher killings, bringing in each and every staff member to interrogate them on every decision and every mistake. This would be the next lucky break Dexter had, as Doakes was called in from suspension to discuss his case with Lundy.
And let me guess, he lost his cool and made himself look super unhinged and suspicious.
Pretty much. Doakes was the main detective in charge of 4 out of the 18 bodies found in the ocean bed. When the men had been alive, Doakes had been unable to obtain a single conviction. Lundy noted that the Smith case was thrown out for inadmissible evidence. Orozco skipped bail, and the Rodrigo case lost to bad blood work. This Rodrigo case must have held some special significance to Doakes because he seemed to take major offence to this, blaming Dexter for the fuck-up and storming out of the station before Lundy could conclude the interview. So I've mentioned before that Dexter liked to keep trophies, a few reminders of his conquests. This included a few journals and a little wooden box full of blood slides, 1 slide for each victim. Before killing his victims, Dexter would use a scalpel to slice the victim's cheek. Then he would collect a drop of blood and place it between 2 glass slides. Now, I already mentioned that he wasn't killing a whole pile at the start. But after he had encountered Jimenez, he was able to get his groove back. And just in case you think the investigation slowed him down, while he was being investigated, Dexter murdered a guy called Little Chino, Roger Hicks, Ken Olson, Santos Jimenez eventually, Jose Garza, Juan Renez, and Tio Famosa.
You think he'd be lying low for a while, especially after getting away with the ITK stuff and his connection to Brian Moser?
He continued killing because if he didn't, he was afraid the pent-up need to kill would give it away in front of Lundy, who was well able to spot a predator. But he did decide to get rid of his trophies.
You mentioned this last week, alright, how we only have a handful of journals once that were thought to have been important moments in life for him, but we only have those few because he would regularly panic and destroy the rest, understandably.
Yeah, and the journals we have are written in code, kind of disguised like fiction novels. He was working under like the pseudonym Jeff Lindsay, the name he would use later as cover when he was hiding again.
Okay.
So he decided to burn the journals and throw his slides overboard as he moved the boat from the harbour. The journals were no problem, sitting in his lockbox in his closet, same place they always were. The slides, on the other hand, were a different story. Dexter used to hide the slides in his air conditioning unit, sliding off the front panel to place the box inside, then replacing the front panel. He always hid them there and never moved them. But they were gone now. Dexter actually didn't suspect Doakes at first. He believed the FBI were onto him and just waiting for DNA results before they came in for the official arrest. Thankfully, his insider position put that worry to rest, but there was still the mystery of the missing slides. A mystery that would be solved relatively soon when they were found in the car of James Doakes, who was currently in Haiti for undisclosed reasons. It was believed later that he suspected Dexter as the butcher and had gone to Haiti to use his connections there to source a private testing facility so that he could positively ID the blood slides to the Bay Harbour Butcher 18 and come back, all, look what I got, assholes. What Doakes didn't know was Lundy had already beat him to the punch, testing the slides found in Doakes' car and positively IDing the slides to the Bay Harbour 18, along with a lot more, all fitting the butcher's MO, avoiding conviction or slipping away from suspicion of past unsolved murder cases. A friend inside the force, Lieutenant Maria LaGuardia, gave Doakes the tip-off that he was now the main suspect in the Butcher case and encouraged him to hand himself in so he could clear his name. Doakes decided to go another way and stayed on the run from his peers and Lundy's task force, all the while tracking Dexter, desperately trying to find evidence to clear his name and finally nail Dexter for the killer he knew him to be.
Patreon is alive, alive, live, alive, live, alive. Patreon is alive, alive, horror podcast. Patreon is alive, alive, live, alive, live, alive. Patreon is alive, alive.
Hey kids, can't get enough of that blood, guts and gore? Then head on over to our Patreon, where for just $5 a month you'll get exclusive access to our true crime show Real Monsters and horrific history tales from Playing with Bones with Aimee Rose, along with early access to our minisodes and ad-free access to everything else. All this and loads more horror-tastic extras from the Horrorverse. So what are you waiting for? Permission? Go nick your parents' card today and subscribe now at patreon.com/It's Alive Alive Pod. Remember, that's It's Alive Alive Podcast, the really, really fake true crime horror podcast. It's Alive Alive, all the guts and gore with none of the guilt. So we already mentioned that Dexter made the mistake of sleeping with Lila after a little argument with Rita over Lila. And just like most men that sleep with women that was not their partner, Dexter had instant regret, and what's worse, he discovered pretty quickly that Lila was an absolute nutcase. We've already covered it. Lila was obsessive, and it was getting worse. She was trying to get too close to him, and it's Dexter. The reason I said that last week, we talked about why he was with Rita. Yeah. He was with Rita because she was a beaten woman. Mm-hmm. She liked distance. She liked she was timid. She kept herself there wasn't a lot of physicality between the physical touch between them. Yeah. Yeah, and that was fine with him because he had his guard up and it was okay for them to have their guard up. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, he started to connect the fact that there was this boyfriend's arson death, and then the fire that happens when he goes to spend time with Cody, showing that there was obvious fucking jealousy there. Oh, yeah. So he's just like, he wants to get back to her. He knows that's a safe place for him. He knows he has some sort of feeling towards that family. Okay. As much feeling as he can have, and he wants to get back there, and he realizes he's fucked up. So he breaks it off with Lila, who does not take it well. Well, yeah. And she instantly starts dating Angel Batista, who is only happy to go out with this hot English girl after his divorce. Of course he is. Because Batista, I don't know how to describe him. He's, imagine a very happy, nice, well-groomed, Pablo Escobar. Oh, okay. He's a very jolly, happy man. And got a bit of a belly on him, but dresses like your average kind of guy. He's got those kind of Cuban style shirts, fedora hat, that kind of style. From what I've heard, a very good police officer. Yeah. But like the ladies. Okay. And was very happy to get with Lila. Now, Dexter kind of tried to warn him off for a little bit, but he took it as jealousy and you're just jealous, I don't know, and all that. Yeah. He realized pretty quickly, though, that Dexter was right. Yeah. Because Lila came forward and accused Batista of sexual assault. Christ. She then told Dexter that she would drop the charges if he went back out with her. Yeah, we've talked about this before. We talked about this with the thing of, I kill myself if you don't get back together with me. It's like, why do you want to be with somebody that doesn't want to be with you? Like, I mean, what kind of relationship is that where you're like sitting there going, this person is only here out of fear? Yeah. Do you know? Yeah. When that wasn't working as well as she thought it was, she hired the still alive at this point Jimenez, who Dexter had only left unconscious on their Florida trip, to attack Dexter. As they all left. There was kind of like a fucking staff night out playing bowling or something like that. And Dexter went along to, again, he was on the bowling team and all that. And she turned up to this, and then Jimenez attacked him in the parking lot. But obviously, there's cops everywhere. They kind of chased him off. Yeah. And all he did was really slice Dexter's hand. Okay. So obviously at this stage, Dexter realizes Lila is just more trouble. A loose string he needs to cut away. But first, he needs to track down and kill Jimenez before he tried to finish the job he was hired for. Now, Jimenez was no genius, and it didn't take Dexter long to track him down to a small cabin hidden in the brush deep in the Florida Everglades. A thing we now know is only solely in Florida. There he waited, ambushed Jimenez, and finally got a little revenge for his mother, killing Jimenez in his usual fashion. After the deed was done, Dexter was loading the various different parts of Jimenez onto his boat when he heard a familiar voice say, "Freeze, motherfucker!" I'm going to get in trouble for that as well this week. Doakes had figured it out and followed Dexter to the cabin. Now, at gunpoint, Dexter was forced to confess to being the Bay Harbour Butcher. At some point, there was a scuffle, and although Dexter was skinned by a bullet, he was still able to get the better of Doakes, locking him into a sleeper hold and dropping the sergeant where he stood. It's believed, although he doesn't detail it much in his journal, Dexter said he locked Doakes in a small cage built in a cabin, presumably for dogs, but considering it belonged to Jimenez, who knows. Doakes stayed there for a few days, where he tried desperately to convince the butcher to hand himself in and end the madness before he went too far, killing an innocent cop instead of the killers he usually targeted.
He's not wrong. I mean, if Dexter kills Doakes, then he's just like every other killer and takes away all justification for killing so many victims up to this point.
Yep, slight loophole though is rule number 1 of the code. Don't get caught.
What good is the code then? He's going to get caught due to his own negligence. Doakes shouldn't lose his life because Dexter didn't dispose of the evidence correctly.
No, I agree. And so did Dexter. And the way he saw it, Doakes blaming Dexter for killing was not a problem. I mean, why you ask? Just read The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Doakes had been screaming freak at Dexter enough that no one would think twice about it. Especially once Doakes was arrested with DNA proof locking him down as the Bay Harbour Butcher.
Mm-hmm. So instead of taking his life, he's just going to ruin it instead.
Pretty much. He used a spiked bottle of water to knock Doakes out. Then he took DNA and put his prints on a knife, confirmed to be the style of knife used often by the Bay Harbour Butcher in the Bay Harbour Butcher killings. Basically, Dexter's choice of knife. The plan was in place. He just had 1 or 2 more details to take care of. Only problem was, before he could take care of those issues, namely Lila, detectives worked out where Doakes was hiding out. Deb was with Dexter when the call came in that they had the location and all units were to head there ASAP. Dexter told Deb to go ahead and he'd catch up with her in his own car. He then took a faster route to try and, first Bueller his way to the cabin before the cops got there. He did not succeed. But due to a gas leak in the cabin, there was an explosion just as the police arrived. 1 body was found inside. It was later confirmed to be Doakes through his dental records.
Dexter must have been relieved. I assume the Bay Harbour Butcher case was closed with Doakes' death and Dexter was off the hook.
Yep. Doakes took the title of the Butcher and Dexter changed dumping ground, finding a stretch of ocean with a strong current to pull the dismembered limbs further out to sea, making their discovery next to impossible. Nearly everything was back to normal.
Nearly everything.
Well, look at the cabin scenario. Doakes was locked in a cage. Dexter wasn't there and hadn't used the gas in the cabin at any point while he was there. Plus, even with the gas on, it would require a spark to ignite. So, was it an accident or did something else light the match to cover up for Dexter's dark passenger?
Lila
had stolen Dexter's GPS from his car and checked the history. Seeing he had visited this cabin repeatedly, she decided to go and see what he was hiding way out in the Everglades, which again we now know is only in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
It's believed she found Doakes and instead of reporting Dexter's crime, felt more connected to the killer than ever, deciding to do what she does best with all of life's inconveniences. She set it on fire.
Yeah.
It's believed Dexter made an attempt on her life in Miami directly after the close of the Bay Harbour Butcher case, after Lila had kidnapped Rita's children, Astor and Cody. Once Dexter came to their aid, she locked him in her apartment, setting it alight just as she had done to her ex-boyfriend Doakes and this apartment once before. Thankfully, Dexter was able to get out of there, the kids unharmed, with the aid of Deborah Morgan. This event helped Rita and Dexter in their reconciliation, though she did make him go through months of couple counselling before she'd fully let him off the hook for the Lila thing.
What happened to her then, Lila?
Lila was last seen in Paris, France in 2007, not long after her Miami arson attacks. She went completely off the radar after that. Now, it was later revealed that Lila had many identities and aliases, so it's possible she's living somewhere under an assumed name to this day. But rumour has it that Dexter Morgan took a trip one weekend around the time she was last seen, and although never confirmed, it is suspected that the Bay Harbour Butcher may have gotten just one international kill. Unless Lila eventually comes forward now that Dexter's dead and gone, we'll probably never know. Another mystery in the horrorverse. Sergeant James Doakes was officially named as the Bay Harbour Butcher by the FBI and Miami Metro PD, and the case was closed after his death. His name would remain tarnished with this title until 2021, when the truth about Dexter Morgan would finally come to light. But we're another 2 weeks away from that yet. Next week, we look at another prolific killer and how his end came at the hands of the Dark Defender when we see the Bay Harbour Butcher Dexter Morgan take on the Trinity Killer, Arthur Mitchell. Until then, you know what to do. Follow us on socials at Alive Alive Pod and check out our Patreon at It's Alive Alive Pod for great shows like our Mini Monsters companion show, Real Monsters, and Amy's great horrific history podcast, Playing with Bones, along with classic episodes of Behind the Mask and classic Real Monsters, and early access to all the week's Mini Monsters every Monday.
All that, and you get ad-free access to our main show and the weekend update, all for just $5 a month. That's on Patreon at It's Alive Alive Pod.
And now the first 7 days are free, so it costs you nothing to go check it out. We'll be back next Wednesday with more tales from the Horrorverse. It's Alive Alive Podcast, all the guts and gore with none of the guilt. See you all next time. Same Alive Alive time, same Horrorverse channel. Okay, love you. Bye-bye.